Recording is on.
Hello everyone. Today is Sunday the 15th of May 2022. This is the Eastern meeting number 109, the Desiderata Extinctionati. We had a topic planned today, but it might be an open conversation. We'll see what happens, as usual. Who wants to start? Anybody has something to say first before we start the conversation?
I wanted to just touch on going back to Hugh's ufology. I don't think it will take us that long. It was basically a question which is to do with why he raked up this subject and focused attention on it. And I just sort of want to clarify with people what their idea was on why Hugh focused attention on this. And also, just related to that, of course, is the fact that there was suddenly a lot of media attention. These reports being released in the US, they're confirming that after all these years, government agencies are confirming that, oh yes, these were sightings that were taken very seriously, and we think there's something in it. After years and years of either denial or debunking it, or explaining it away by some, the weather balloon kind of thing, they're finally admitting that there's something in it. Now, my understanding is that Hugh felt that they were sort of resurrecting this UFO thing and giving it a certain gloss of legitimacy as a vehicle for to get going as the general collapse of societies comes on, as a thing to distract people's attention, and also it worked in, of course, probably to certain points of view about the religious points of view of the second coming, or aliens coming to rescue certain select human beings and take them off the planet, and all those various things that of course you've probably heard about. So there was that side of it, probably behind why Hugh was bringing this up. And related to that was the fact that what he spent some time discussing was that sort of going into the experiences of these Air Force pilots and similar people who had supposedly seen UFOs, and explaining how certain states of consciousness induced under very stressful circumstances can lead to psychic and visual phenomena that would lead people to believe they've seen something, and it could be strong enough to actually be manifesting materially in some way. So there was all of that, but which Hugh went through in his videos. But what intrigued me, that I noticed, that once this war started between Russia, well, nominally between Russia and Ukraine, but I think it's a sort of a proxy war between the West and Russia at this stage. That once this came on, all of this UFO stuff just seemed to vanish. It's there's no mention in the media, nothing showing up on YouTube. Nobody. It just seemed to have just been dropped very suddenly, which uh, I'm kind of wondering whether. Uh, I don't know how you want to put this, but with the deep state or whoever, whatever conspiracy theory about who's controlling the earth you want to subscribe to, whether they decided that it was going to be a better scam to put a war on to distract everybody's attention and while behind the scenes they're doing their own thing, it'd be better to use a war as that strategy rather than to use a resurgence in UFO appearances. So I just wanted to sort of ask, what the others might think about the question of, why we suddenly had this recognition of UFOs and now suddenly that's gone. I guess that's basically my question.
That's brilliant, Gary. I really understand what you're saying, and I really see what Hugh was saying about that. But I think, Jason, you might have something to add to this.
Well, it was very interesting to see Hugh go in that direction quite suddenly after steering the discussion towards revealing his interest in the flippening and developing with the group the manifesto, which is a very long document. And in that manifesto, UFOs are mentioned only twice as a error of a possible error that people might make due to effects of changes in climate and magnetic fields. It comes up in that, in my recollection. I'm not looking at it. And what was just a single reference in that manifesto, he then enlarged on in, I think, more than one session in December, January, February. I don't recall when it really started, his discussion of UFO. And then it was kind of like he was in advice mode on several times and repeated. He said, if a ship, a vessel comes down claiming to be an alien ship, don't get on it. I think that's the right advice I'm giving you. Could be the wrong advice, but he went on and on about that, and that was sort of entertaining. And he did introduce the idea that some of this or a lot of this could be a mass psychological manifestation. Indeed, he introduced mass psychological manifestation. I don't know if that's the correct term. There's a number of different terms for it. You call it mass hysteria or mass psychosis. He didn't use those terms, but those are related concepts that we could be actually manifesting an illusion of a certain condition. But he had already covered over in the immediate period that he released the flippening, but also very much earlier on, there's several references to the fact that he believes that we are alone in the universe. He's not someone who believes that there are other advanced civilizations. And, I'm just covering over stuff that's pretty evident in Hugh's sort of body of work. I share that view. And he covered over pretty much that a lot of the seemingly government UFO stuff is to distract us from programs that we know and common sense.
We can't hear you, Jason, anymore.
Just go back a sentence or two if you can, Jason.
You can hear me. So I was just saying that much of the UFO stuff out there he had said was government disinformation to distract us and make us not make us believe that advanced technology programs of the military are, they'd rather have us believe these are little green men or unexplained phenomenon that they are test programs for advanced technologies. And so, and I think it's on record that the government has encouraged UFO, little green men theories in order to distract people from defense programs. I think he also acknowledged that the U.S. in the last 10 years has developed, and other countries too, the idea of a space defense force or a space military, a whole new branch of militarization for space, which is extremely regrettable. And that the promulgation of UFO concepts very much serves the interest in drumming up support, unconscious support in the population for simple acceptance of yet more military dimensionality and growth into space. So I mean, we have a space force. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like something out of a Austin Powers movie. I mean, we have a U.S. Space Force in uniforms, and so it just goes on and on. I'm kind of just covering over stuff, and I think that what interested me about Hugh's work is he used for the first time I heard the word octave, that there's an octave of worldviews, or that, and it went with his recent, and maybe you guys can date this more in a more detailed way. He was talking about this musical analogy of do, re, mi, fa, so, and we're in a certain chord, we're in a certain key that has meanings. And there's only 2 or 3 other people I've ever heard to advance that, other than Pythagoras, or I mean, to modern critical thinkers who are speaking in that analogy. So I've said a lot, but Gary, does this cover over some of the background that you have in mind on this?
Yeah, you actually brought up a couple other things which we could go into, but yeah, the octave, I think, was related to the kind of parallel to the I think to the chakra energetic systems of the body, and that there was a significant step, do, re, mi, and then there was and then you're into like the central chakras, and it represents a leap into a more energetic realm from a more physical, dense kind of energy and more physical realm. But yeah, just when you were talking there, a couple of things that I was thinking of, which is sure, we've got the mass distraction, and I would like to get back to that in the conversation, because this is basically my question: is have they simply given up on UFOs as a mass distraction and decided to go for World War III instead? And the other thing, though, is regarding what you said about the Space Defense Force and the UFOs as a cover for advanced technology testing, is that uh, uh, this could be I mean, you get the impression that some of the people involved in this were sufficiently, I don't know what the word is, deluded is not quite the right word, but they were sufficiently sucked into it that they might be thinking that, if they got to the point where they really believe in these aliens and this higher technology, that possibly part of their agenda is, well, if we can get hold of their technical capabilities, then this might be the way we can save the world. That we can transcend our problems by the use of technologies that we don't currently have. So that is a point that just sort of came to my mind while you were talking there. And yeah, I mean, my basic thing was, it just occurred to me one day that we had gone from a situation where there's this of a resurgence of mentioning and discussion about UFOs, and it's just seems to have, just in my personal experience at any rate, it just seems to have completely vanished again. It's just gone quiet. Uh, and uh, the I don't know, because I mean, you don't know what is going on in the machinations of the minds of people who are triggering large global events. Um, whether and I mean, this gets back to the discussions we had about conspiracy theories with Hugh as well, is whether UFO awareness was being deliberately pushed as a strategy, and then did they then decide that, well, it was going to be better to push war as a strategy, and then actually go as far as creating one. So yeah, I mean, that's just just all I can think of at the moment regarding what you said. But there's a lot in that. Um, just kind of perplexed at the moment. I think everybody is as to the significance of events now, um, and the significance of the UFO thing going back, a few months ago when it was being mentioned a lot.
I think Hugh liked analogies and symbols very well, very much. I mean, and as you said, Jason, bringing up the UFOs subject just at the same time as the flippening that he called an hypothesis. Well, he still, I think still a very important thing to study. And I think there is somebody in our group that wants to invite or to make an expose in light of a Russian guy who's doing some research on that. It's always interesting to have more information about that. But to come back to the parallel, you know how he liked analogies, symbols, and how he always said that we had to pick our cults. And I think that the movement, the ufology movement, is in parallel with the emergence of new religions or reinforcing of old religions and cults in these times of collapse. And he always said, if there's a ship that comes to pick you up, don't go on that ship, because that's the end of you. He was also, as you said very rightly, very very adamant about the fact that we are alone in this universe. I mean, aware or convinced, and that's also fuels a lot of the things that are in the manifesto in terms of we need to survive because we're humans, because we are one experience. And I think all these points that you've made, Jason, go back to how Hugh needed to use a lot of these beliefs. You see, there's an enormous crowd that's distracted constantly for the last, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 years with this ufology thing, and who is spending an awful lot of energy on that, and who are looking at external forces that going to help them, a bit like the Christians or other cults who are looking outside in order not to look inside. And I think that's also something very important in Hugh's approach.
Yeah, there's a couple of critical theorists, probably more than a couple, who've made remarks to the effect that all conspiracy theory, these are broad generalizations, is have as part or all of their root a utopian desire to escape the global system of capitalism, the global logic of capitalism. Because if you can have a conspiracy theory where it's all about chemtrails or it's all about UFOs, there's some secret conspiracy. If you can have a conspiracy that it's all you know, controlled by the Illuminati, or it's all controlled by the deep state, or it's all fill in the blank. You have an empowering explanation as to why the world is the way it is. Uh, Hilariously, most of those conspiracies, if you were to grant them, you would be you are the end note of the sort of end logic of most of those conspiracies is there is no way out. In other words, we're in such a world of total control and domination that there's little or no way out. And so how does that give us agency? So, and it is all serving as a distraction from the thing, the real thing of which there may be no way out, which is we're stuck in this hyper marketized, hyper corrosive global capitalist logic, which no one person or group or banks or ethnic group or anybody is in charge of. You know, this goes to one of the, it's a contradiction in Hugh's logic himself. Listen carefully. What did he say? He said on many occasions, they're not in control. He made the remark that in South Africa, a country he knows well, he said several times, if the white majority, the ruling whites, had simply said, okay, you take the controls, you take over, we concede, you go ahead. He made the point that the black South Africans would have tried to operate the nation state and found that they faced the exact same problems, other than the racial divide, the economic problems, the problems of distribution of wealth, etc. It would not have all been remedied on day one of them taking over. And this has been shown in almost all decolonization in Africa. In most countries, we're way past the point where you can continue to blame the British or the French or the Belgians or whoever was the previous colonist for the current problems in those countries. So Hugh had said both. He had promulgated odd conspiracies, I think, just as a LARP or he was a gamester. He was a he said he's very LARPy at one point. He admitted that. So you can't really tell when he's just fielding something. But we have the paradox, and I'm not the first to point it out, that the most conspiracies that are deeply held, that go beyond a single historical incident, that are trying to be a global conspiracy, the end logic is that you are attributing a degree of competence, a spectacular degree of effectiveness and control to governments or some behind the scenes group, when we know for a fact they are not in control. They are literally juggling, what is the phrase? Juggling chickens and chainsaws, trying to keep their power, trying to reinforce their advantage. They don't all agree with each other. World leaders do not all agree with each other. They don't get in some room. There's not some secret, fraternity. They are wildly competitive within organizations. They want to bring each other down and get the advantage and get each other in a half Nelson and preferably a full Nelson wrestling hold and maybe crack the other guy's neck. I mean, we're a murderous, competitive, collaboratively murderous species. And, people who think that, yes, Putin can be viewed as a creation of the U.S. and of NATO. Either a passive creation, like our bungling of handling the winning, so-called winning of the Cold War in 89, 90, 91, we had a historic opportunity to get it right, and we got it wrong on every chord and bungled the ability to make Russia and the former Soviet states into equally footed citizens, global citizens of the world. We, in many ways, reinforced the paranoia and the nationalism there. But, you can't blame all of Putin's actions on the U.S. It just doesn't fly. I mean, Putin is not a good guy. You do not want to be in Russia. I promise you. You do not want to be under Putin. It is not a happy place. You know, and so you have to go back to values. They're the only anchor. And again, I've gone all over the map, but distractions at bottom, everything is a distraction from for us on this group, from the fundamentals of collapsing systems, the fundamentals of overshoot, the fundamentals of climate change, that whose every signal now tells us that we're in an accelerative, self-reinforcing, abrupt climate change situation, for which all the scientists who are credible know that there's no easy solution. You can't just stop. Even if we stop using all fossil fuels tomorrow, which is not going to happen, it probably is not going to reverse. We're probably on a the rocks are already sliding down the hill. We loosened one. We had the agency to, in California along the coast, it's so friable that the highway department hires, every year they hire mountain climbers who have to volunteer and sign a waiver. And they're commissioned to go up and loosen the most likely stones, big rocks, to cause landslides, because they want to proactively cause landslides. And so I'm using this as a metaphor. Humans had the agency to use a lever to move a very big stone. It then causes a landslide. When that landslide gets underway, nobody has the agency to stop it. And that landslide continues along the California highway until it reaches the next equilibrium state, which is when a huge number of rocks descend upon a stretch of highway, and the highway crew is there to start cleaning them up. They've precipitated a landslide proactively to prevent it from coming down on people's heads. But it's just a little example of how you have all sorts of situations where humans have an agency to initiate a state that goes into a moment of disequilibrium. And during that moment of disequilibrium, all the technology in the world will not stop even just this 500 square meters of landslide from happening. We've had the agency to shift the climate, and the landslide has begun, and we don't know where it ends in some new equilibrium state. Will the new equilibrium state support us or any life forms? We don't know. We don't know where it's going to land, and there's no cleanup crew that can clean it up at the end. It's a war against entropy that we're engaged in civilization, a foolish war. So, again, I apologize, but all these things are threaded and relational, and we can try and focus on conspiracies while we ignore the fundamentals, and adjusting to the fundamentals that I just covered. That is the mental and psychological and spiritual task that this group has wrestled with, I think, very effectively under Hugh, and we're going to continue to wrestle with it. I think we're all clueful, and it will be interesting to involve and interview others who are similarly clueful and see what additional perspectives
I think we lost you there a bit, Jason, again.
Yeah, I was just saying can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm just saying that, this group is held together. I think.
You're very muffled, Jason. You must have moved something there. Yeah.
How about now?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, all I'm saying is this group is held together in an exploration of the responses to collapse, to civilizational overshoot, to climate change, to the psychological consequences and civilizational consequences of the, if you will, the alien cortex as a main thread of explanation that Hugh initiated, and along with so many other related threads. And if we involve others who have a similarly expansive scope, such as George Socrates, I think it will be interesting. Anyway, that's I've rambled a lot. I've woven a lot of things together. I don't know if it's useful.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I'll go back a bit to talk about some of the points you mentioned. I remember we did mention the Fermi paradox a few times, and I don't know whether it was on a meeting or just a conversation that you and I had, but where we spoke about that. My take on this has always been that regarding looking out into space for some other being somewhere else, that actually we had the telescope around the wrong way, and that really, when we look out into supposed space or galaxies or whatever, we think that we're looking out into somewhere else. And I think, I mean, I don't know how to put this very adequately into terms that don't sound a bit silly, uh, but I think from a sort of spiritual point of view, um, we think that there's this out there where there might be other people, other beings and things, because we fail to recognize our own connection with everything. And so when we look out, we're not looking at something else, we're looking at parts of ourselves that we don't recognize are part of ourselves. And the extension of that is that the alien life, the extraterrestrials that we're looking for, they've been right here with us the whole time. We are what we've been looking for. So there's that way of thinking a little bit differently about the Fermi paradox, if it's not too way out for anyone to
I
entertain.
would.
And I go on, sorry.
Well, Gary, I'll be brief. That's absolutely brilliant. I mean, almost every aliens invading movie that you see, the this alien species has come to Earth and is now enslaving us and exploiting the resources and killing us. Well, that alien species is us. I mean, we are doing that
Yeah,
to. What we are doing is that which we attribute to evil aliens in every alien frickin' movie that Hollywood produces. I mean, it's just absolutely brilliant. We are the alien species, and within us, the alien cortex, I think, is what you're referring to, or part of what you're.
yes, I think when you look at it, there's you can see that he chose that name, uh, to convey some quite a few different thoughts. Um, so yeah, it's rather clever, really. But I was thinking too about what you said about the if you take your belief in a particular conspiracy theory to an extreme, it sort of implies that you don't have any agency. And again, that implies the same mistake of dividing ourselves from everything else, is that we think that we should have agency over the rest of creation, or some ability to act upon it. Um, and as there's all this struggle and frustration goes on with human beings physically and with the environment and also between each other. Um, and I think again it comes down to well, it actually came down. I think I don't know whether we were specifically discussing the question of free will. The thing is, it's not that we either do have free will or agency or don't have it. It's the fact that if you are properly in union with existence, there's no need for it. It's irrelevant. The question doesn't arise because what have you got will over yourself, or why do you need will or control or agency over everything if you are intimately connected with it all? Um, I mean, this is where the Enlightenment sort of buggered everything up, because it's separated everything off. And we started to feel this disconnection, and then once you get disconnected, the whole question of will and agency comes up. Um, so uh, I don't know if I've explained that very well at all. I'll just while touching on the mention of conspiracy theory, I think here, and I was making a comment on Reddit just today or yesterday. Somebody posted, I think it was DB or somebody, um, and Hugh and I were talking about conspiracy theory as existing not by design necessarily, but simply by the way things were occurring as a matter of course, and the recognition that they were just developing in a certain direction, which would give you the impression that there may be some intention behind it. But in fact, it was just simply the outcome of the way things were going. And Hugh actually had a word for it, and I can't recall the word he used. And I've been just trying to recover this word. I thought it was his.
Gary, Gary, do you mean like how the mind like projects its patterns, like puts
Yeah, I
things
think that's the
together?
one. Yeah.
Oh, the word is apophenia or something like that.
Oh,
Uh,
Epiphania, you
I,
could be right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Because I'd forgotten it. Thanks for that. I actually thought it was an antidromia, but that's not quite the same thing. Epiphania, yes, I think that's it. It's where, you know, you're seeing a pattern emerging, probably because we're prone, we're very, what's the word? We're very good at pattern recognition, in many different ways. And so, a certain sequence of events are occurring. You think, oh, hey, somebody's behind this. They're pushing the buttons here, making World War III, or there's something going on behind all this sudden publicity about UFOs. But in fact, there was no particular intention or causation. So there's that background to bear in mind in thinking about conspiracy theory scenarios, I guess. Um, and in that sense, what Jason was just saying about Hugh saying, that these people behind the scenes who appear to be in control are not in control. Uh, and that's but from the outside they can appear to be in control, and as well, of course, they're also probably actively engaged in the process of propagandizing people to believe that they are in control anyway. So that's operating in two different ways there. And it was interesting, Jason, what you said about South Africa, about what would have happened if back during when apartheid was being challenged, if the blacks had been given the levers of power. And I don't know if Lionel Snell put up a couple of videos just very recently on the subject of populism, and he was talking about uh, why it is that populism seems to gain, well, a lot of popularity, why it seems to get more support than it deserves. And in his little talks there, if you want to check up on that, it's what's the name of his channel? It's Ramsey Jukes, isn't it? I think on YouTube, his channel, and he actually, in part of his talk, describes just what you're saying, that when these people do get, even now, not so much when apartheid was breaking down. But even to this day in South Africa, that they're discovering that now that they've got the levers of power, that they're tending to behave just the same way, all the corruption and failure to improve the society and all the rest of it that was occurring when when apartheid was in ascendancy. And I just there's yeah, I might leave it at that because I've gone on for a bit too long. Does anyone else want to make a point there?
Yeah, I came in a little bit late, but yeah, what Jason was saying makes a lot of sense about the logic of the system, and using its own logic will lead nowhere. It's circular, and what people don't realize is it's like the culture itself is like an excrescence out of the collective consciousness of the entire, humanity. And so I think that's the reason why Hugh was always hammering on about doing the inner work, to meditate and become aware and enlightened, so to speak. I don't know exactly how to describe that phenomenon, but you kind of have to not go into it with the cultural conditioning. And people are using what they have, whether they're in power or using activism, and it's just not going to work unless they have the I don't know, the awareness of where all these things come from.
I'm actually engaged in correspondence with somebody who's on the edges of this group on just that point. I can't disclose anymore, but I'm finding it difficult to get across just what you just said there now about the necessity to bring that deeper understanding into it, because otherwise you just don't really get anywhere.
Yeah, the whole thing, like Hugh said in the Globeki Tepe video, the whole logic of this entire system started with trade, and trade makes humanity an enemy of itself automatically because the whole point of trade is domination.
Trade and
trade, yes, but also what I came to mind there, Gary, when oh Jesus, I'm so tired. I'm losing the thread of my thoughts. But and yeah, what you're talking about, the distraction, we are talking about the apophenia. I think I read so many interesting and listen to so many interesting people who are analyzing the current situation, whether deep state theories, whether the sabotaging of our society at the moment with the events in Ukraine, the COVID episode. There's enormous amount of talented writers. Some of them we have interviewed, like Paul Kingsnorth, or we tried to, or other people. But there is that central thing lacking in them that I mean, in spite of all the talent in their writing and their expose, they don't look at themselves. They don't look at our loss of connection. They're avoiding the real issue, and that's what I find difficult in selecting people to interview, because they all going on another direction, on another orbit. I can't really explain what I mean, but I think you might be able to translate and understand what I'm saying. There's another thing that I wanted to add, and I'll let you continue. Is earlier, Jason and Gary, you mentioned the octave thing that Hugh brought in, and I really like to, maybe not in this meeting, but to go back on this, because I think this is a very interesting thing that he only touched, and I think that's quite fundamental.
yeah, it is, because I mean, again, he was using that as an analogy, and I mean, well, I mean, Jason's mentioned that a couple of times. I think that the use of analogy, and I think the you've got no choice but to speak in that way when you're dealing with the realm of what is there when the alien cortex isn't obscuring the sky, because uh, what you've got with the alien cortex is basically the nexus of language and thought. Now that means that once you want to leave the realm of words to escape the alien cortex, you're then stuck as a spiritual teacher or somebody who wants to talk about this, because you've still got to use words to communicate to other people. And I think this leads into the use of analogies, and also, of course, Hugh was very interested, of course, in mythological accounts and their symbolism involved in that, because that's the best you can do. You either got to remain silent and say nothing, or you've got to move into a form of language which is less objective and rational and precise and clearly defined. You've got to move into a kind of a different realm. And I'm sure DB would have something to say about this, being someone who's uh, you know, appreciates the qualities of poetry. This is also a realm that works in the way mythological stories and the use of analogy and in language in trying to describe something, because it gets you away. I think, well, like Sophie was just saying, with some of the people, she's just saying that there's something, there's a central thing that you eventually end up bumping into every time, something missing there with them. They do really well, but then when it gets down to a nitty gritty point, you can see that they're kind of stuck. And this is going back to what I mentioned a minute ago about the person I was communicating with. And I was aware that this was what was happening. There was nothing wrong with what this person was doing. The difficulty was that they couldn't see that they were coming from a mental position. They'd chosen a mental position, in other words, some ideology or some form of idealism about an outcome, and were holding on to that, and that was the impetus that was driving what they were trying to do. And what I was trying to say is, I'm not trying to tell you that what you are actually doing in the world is not appropriate, but it's coming from it's coming from a place that requires you to kind of hold on to your alien cortex position and point of view. So what you're doing is got its foundations in a problematic place. Uh, I wish I could explain this a little bit better, because Hugh did also talk about, this idea of, well, not doing a thing, supposing, for instance, some kind of activism, and not doing it without necessarily being attached to the outcome, but you're simply doing it because it's the right thing to do. And that sounds great. And you think, oh, yeah, sure, that sounds great. But I think it's kind of booby-trapped, because you have to think that the right thing to do is probably is not going to be what your mind, your alien cortex decides is the right thing to do on the balance of all its logic and rationality and reasoning and all those. This right thing to do is going to be a kind of how would you call it? Outside of rational conceit. It's going to be the right thing is going to be sort of what arises within you once you just take your thought process out of the picture and let it come up by itself. It's not going to be something that's deliberately decided upon. I think this is what throws people, because they're expecting to be able to account for their decision to do this right thing And if this right thing arises from outside of their alien cortex, and then somebody asks them about it, they're not going to be able to account for it. So that's kind of, I suppose they've got the feeling that it leaves them in an awkward situation. Um, um, and I think you can see. I think he did relate some of the those beautiful little um, Chinese tales in some of the to illustrate uh, some of these points. That you just uh, how are you doing a particular thing, not because you're holding on to a particular view about it. I don't know whether it's relevant, but the only one that comes to mind is the one about the two monks who were. This could have been Alan Watts anyway, not Hugh. The two monks who were walking along, and some young woman had got into distress, and one monk uh, immediately rushes over to save the woman from drowning or whatever it was, and puts her down on the bank, and then they just keep walking, and the other monk says, "Oh, you're a complete failure as a monk because you've broken your vow to have nothing to do with any female people, and the monk who done the rescue said, look, he said, you're basically said, look, I put that woman down 2 hours ago, and you're still carrying her with you in your mind. And I think his point was very much that the monk who rescued the woman, he just did the right thing just like that. It wasn't a process of cogitation. No decisions were made. It wasn't a process that involved his alien cortex at all. Whereas the monk that was pretending to be all very righteous and pious was holding on to his piousness as a mental position. And of course, it was leading him to, uh, certainly to misunderstand uh, where the right action came from. He was expecting that the right action would come out of um, his sort of liturgy of allowed actions in his mind, and things that were moral and things that weren't moral and all the rest of it. Uh,
Oh yeah,
so
yeah. I think basically the theme is like trying to leap ahead of the alien cortex. Yeah, where the monk is sitting there with those dictums or rules or whatever, and trying to contrive and follow them instead of leaping ahead of it, and not calculating and calculating about it.
yeah, well, not even leaping ahead, but just sorry, I'm having a seniors moment too. Um, just letting go. I mean, realizing that you'll probably get a better quality outcome in whatever you're going to do if you actually sort of just let go of the process and let something happen. And it all, really so much of any genuine spiritual teaching comes down to this question of letting go. And it doesn't mean letting go of some particular thing. It just means allowing uh, yeah, I mean, I'm a, no, it might sound like a bit like a Chinese legend too, but I mean, sort of allowing the universe just to flow of its own accord. Stop trying to stuff around with it and direct it and manipulate things. Um, you know, and also anticipate. Oh, supposing I was walking along one day and I was in the same position as those two monks. Now, would I rescue that woman or wouldn't I? Just forget about that and just go for your walk, and maybe if you come across a drowning woman, you might do something, or maybe you won't. That will happen. That will unfold of its own accord at the time. Uh, but we've got this sort of. I think it comes back to possibly our control anxiety. Um, uh, Again, which is a alien cortex thing. I think we could probably even relate this whole thing back to the predicament that we're in at the moment with the collapse of civilization and the ecosphere and everything like that, with the attempt to control has got us into this, and the attempt to control it is probably just going to make it worse now that it's all started.
Yeah, and I get the sense that like a lot of people, because that kind of sense of control is failing and everything seems to be, going to bits, it just creates this like cycle of cynicism, and it just like stultifies any kind of attempt at imagination or look inward. Yeah, it's I don't, yeah, I don't like it. I mean, of course it's bad and we're probably all screwed, but I don't abide that cynical attitude. I don't think it's good at all. It's good to be realistic and look at the situation and not have like naive hopes, but I don't think this cynical cycle of just saying, "Oh, we're all dead," and then just like going back to watching TV, like I just don't abide that cynical attitude.
Yeah, because it can be. I think possibly can be difficult to clearly distinguish between that kind of cynicism and just not trying to control things that can't be controlled. Actually, you're reminding me of something. I was reading something, and there is actually I think it's what you would call a school of art, which is called Russian fatalism, and it is I think it comes from the times of the revolution, around about that stage, and there was a series of artists here would do these drawings of rather resigned figures who didn't have any answers anymore, and uh,
Oh, you mean
but
the Russian nihilists? Is that what they're called in
yeah,
Russia?
I think
Yeah.
when I read, yeah, Russian nihilists, yeah, I think where I saw it, it was referred to as Russian fatalism, but it's probably the same thing, yeah. And I thought it was interesting just to contemplate that, um, uh, because there seems to be such a sometimes a thin margin between, cynicism and nihilism, and 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 still a well, I don't know how you're going to describe this as an acceptance of what's occurring, simply being realistic about it, um, because again, fatalism is a kind of a refuge. You develop this little mental hideaway in the woods called "my attitude is fatalism," and then go and open the door and go inside it and bar the door up and say, well, this is where I'm going to live during collapse, kind of thing. And I think possibly the problem with that is that it's like every single thing which is a mental construct is that at some point you're not going to be able to uphold it anymore. It's going to collapse on you, and then your little safe ideology or your little safe thought that you're hiding inside is not going to be there, and then you're going to be all exposed to the actual reality of reality. And then what will you do? And possibly that's uh, brings just brings me back to the spiritual notion of dying before you die, and why not, in terms of the mental construct I was just talking about, why not demolish the mental construct now and learn what it's like to be without it, rather than waiting to the point of crisis, which is the worst possible time to be trying to figure out what to do about it. Do it now, do it ahead of time, Um, so I don't know if that makes any sense to you or not.
Yes, it does. And actually, You see, that's what the nihilists or the cynics don't do. They take a shortcut, and they're avoiding that precocious, or that death of the self, actually, and I of the ego rather. And I think that is why why he was always shouting Macchio, Macchio. Remember the episode of Bukowski? This is a dead end, and a lot of the people I was referring to earlier, who are writing at the moment and very talently, or talking very talently about the situation, tend either to avoid the real issues and themselves, looking inside, and also tend to lead people on this path, I think. I'm thinking of different writers. I might post them on Reddit that I've read recently, who are extremely talented and really have a good analysis of what's going on. But I'm afraid that their readers are going to have this fatalistic attitude that you're describing very well, Gary, about, oh well, I'll just wait for collapse in my little niche.